Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Cracking the Nut breakout session, Building Resilient Food Systems with Digital Agriculture from COVID-19 to Climate Adaptation. I can see people joining. Maybe we can wait for another 30 seconds and then we can start our session. Thank you all for joining today. Thank you for joining this session. This is the GSMA session, Building Resilient Food Systems with Digital Agriculture from COVID-19 to Climate Adaptation. Thank you all for joining this session and our esteemed panelists from 4 organizations that we will introduce a bit later in our session. My name is Panos Lukos. I'm a Senior Insights Manager of the GSMA AgriTech program. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Jan Priebe, also Senior Insights Manager of the program. In the next 90 minutes, with support from our panelists, we will provide insights into how emerging challenges can accelerate the adoption of digital agriculture to help smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries who are disproportionately vulnerable to external shocks. Only recently, we had the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the discussion over the last couple of weeks has been also around the climate crisis, and that very relevant to this has been the COP26 conference in Glasgow in the UK. Moving to the next slide, I would like, before we start, to acknowledge our donors. This material has been funded by UK Aid from the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and is supported by GSMA and its members. In the next slide, we can see the agenda for today's session. We have a packed agenda for the next 90 or so minutes. I will kick off with some slides and contents to explain who the GSMA is and the AgriTech program. And my colleague Jan will take over to discuss the vulnerability of food systems and the transformative role of digital agriculture. We will then move to a panel discussion with our 4 panelists and continuing after that with a breakout room discussion, and end today's session with breakout room presentations and Q&A. A reminder to our audience to share questions in the chat as we aim to spend time at the end of our 90-minute session to answer questions. Before we start with our content, I would like to run a poll that you can see on this slide. So the poll is about sharing with a broader audience of this session what stakeholder type you identify with. So I would like to ask you to share with us what stakeholder type you identify with. This is a multiple choice question. You can select donor or investor, crop buyer, such as an agribusiness or a cooperative, innovator, such as an agri-tech organization, an NGO or NPO, or some other type of stakeholder. So if you can select the answer that represents you, what stakeholder type do you identify with, and submit that.
Just give another few moments. It looks like everybody but 1 person has answered. All right, I'll end the poll now. I think the results should display. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Great. So we have innovators, we have NGOs, and we have other organizations. Great mix, and I'm sure the content will be in some form relevant to you. So without any further delays, I would like to maybe move to the next slide and share some information about the GSMA and the AgriTech program. So in the next slide, you can see that the GSMA is the Global Trade Association of the mobile industry. Members of the GSMA are over 750 mobile operators globally. We work a lot with our members. We support our members' activities. Under the GSMA, within the organization, there is a unit which is called Mobile for Development, and it is positioned at the intersection of the development sector and the mobile ecosystem. And the work that Mobile for Development does is supported by donors, and it aims to deliver digital innovation while at the same time supporting large-scale socioeconomic impact. In the next slide, you can see the program that my colleague Jan and I work under. That is the AgriTech program of Mobile for Development of the GSMA. The vision of the program is to support equitable and sustainable food chains that empower farmers and strengthen local economies. And to do that, we work closely with the mobile industry, agricultural sector stakeholders such as cooperatives, agribusinesses, innovators and investors from the AgriTech space to support and improve and scale commercially sustainable and viable digital solutions for smallholder farmers in low and middle income countries. And to do that, we work closely with the broader AgriTech ecosystem. We do a lot of research and insights work to inform the donor and investor community and highlight sustainable operational and business models that can have the highest impact and sustainability. We also do a lot of work in the space of technical assistance, offering technical assistance to organizations and running innovation funds by providing funding and deep technical expertise to various organizations and service providers. We support scalable and commercially sustainable solutions that impact smallholder farmers. We currently have an innovation fund with funding from UK's FCDO and 7 projects running across sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia. And naturally, we also facilitate partnerships and synergies between various actors from the broader AgriTech ecosystem. Now, my colleague Jan will take over and he will share some content to cover the next topics in the discussion. Jan, over to you.
Thanks, Panos. In the next section, I'll be providing some context, as Panos said, looking at the vulnerability of food systems first. And let's start by looking at how COVID impacted agricultural activities across the agricultural value chain. And these findings are from a result from a report that GSMA published in April earlier this year. And what we found was that at the beginning of the agricultural value chain, farmers were really struggled to buy inputs. Supply chains were disrupted due to travel restrictions and closures, meaning that less inputs were available, and those that were available were there for higher prices. Also, credit was much more difficult to access as agents of micro lenders were not able to travel into the field. And this lack of inputs meant that cultivation was also affected, as less or lower quality seed and fertilizer were being used. Also, extension networks were disrupted due to the same travel restrictions and social distancing, which also meant that availability of labor was affected, and all in all, crop quality and yields were severely compromised. And finally, at the final stages, crop sales were also disrupted, just because many local markets were closed. Transportation and storage costs were increased significantly. And also there was a drop away of demand from the hospitality industry as restaurants and hotels were forced to close. And in addition to the pandemic, we're also increasingly seeing the impacts of climate change in the form of more frequent and extreme weather-related disasters, which are disproportionately affecting low and middle-income countries. It's expected that areas exposed to serious drought and flooding are expected to increase by up to 44% in 2050. And low and middle-income countries are already experiencing about 20% more extreme heat now compared to the late 90s. And these changes mean that agriculture seasons are becoming more unpredictable. They're reducing the amount of water available to crops, and they're increasing pest and disease pressures on both livestock and crops. So these projections are massively worrying for a sector that typically relies on rain-fed agriculture, has limited access to improved agricultural inputs, and very little recourse to formal safety nets in the case of weather-related shocks. But let's look at how digital agriculture can play a role in providing some resilience to these events. And we found actually in our research that the level of digitization in a country contributed to resilience against the economic impacts from the pandemic. And digital tools were particularly well suited to overcoming these challenges, as they don't require in-person contact and therefore enable business activities to continue in the face of social distancing and travel disruption. They also rely on mobile networks, which cover up to 95% or more of populations in low and middle-income countries, meaning they're very scalable. They're also relatively quick to deploy and easy to customize. And they can be continuously iterated and improved, either through data collected from service users itself or through communication with users directly, meaning that they can be highly responsive to quickly evolving events. And during the pandemic, we found reports from most digital service providers was that usage among smallholder farmers increased. So just to look at the range of digital agriculture solutions that are offered, there are several different approaches to mitigate a range of challenges faced by smallholder farmers, including low productivity income, financial exclusion, and the crisis and challenges that we just covered. And we've divided these up into 5 main use cases. So digital advisory services provide specialized information about a number of topics, including agronomic and livestock advice, best practices, market prices, and weather and climate information, as well as being able to provide training on financial and digital literacy. Agricultural digital financial services facilitate smallholder farmer inclusion in the formal financial economy through providing access to services such as agriculture-specific credit and loans, input financing, savings, and insurance. Digital procurement services digitize processes in the last mile of agricultural value chains. So they improve the efficiency of agribusinesses and the transparency, and enable smallholder access to markets and the development of economic identities, which can be used to further access financial services. Agri e-commerce is a very rapidly growing use case that leverages digital platforms to enable the buying and selling of agricultural produce and also inputs online. And finally, smart farming solutions use sensors, drones, and satellites and other farm assets to generate and transmit data about specific crops, animals, or practices to support agricultural activities. So at this point, we'd like to take a step back again and conduct another poll. And we'd like to see and learn from your experiences in terms of which digital agriculture use cases, such as the ones we just covered, saw greater adoption during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the answer options there are the same 5 categories that I just presented. So digital advisory, agricultural digital financial services, digital procurement, agri e-commerce, and smart farming. So if you could bring that poll up, please. So I'll just give you 30 seconds or so to select your answers and submit. So either you may have experience, direct experience of which use cases were adopted more, or perhaps this is just based on an assumption of how these services evolved during the pandemic. Are we ready to see the results?
Looks like we're just waiting on a few more people. I'd say we could give another 20 seconds or so.
No worries.
All right, I'll go ahead and share the results now.
Thanks, Emily.
Mhm.
Cool. So a clear vote for digital advisory, followed by Agri e-commerce and Agri digital financial services, with digital procurement and smart farming expected to be less popular or less driven during the pandemic. And actually, that's exactly what we found in our research. So the three use cases that we found emerged as the most sought after tools during the pandemic were exactly those three. So while all the use cases are obviously important to address challenges, the specific challenges that became especially urgent due to lockdowns, restrictions on the movements of people and goods and social distancing were addressed by these three use cases. So AgriTech companies that were providing digital agricultural advisory services actually added COVID-19 health advisory to their existing tools, which provided crucial information to rural communities, especially during the early days of the pandemic. And next to that, they were also providing crucial information that enabled farmers to identify open markets, understand price trends, and also how to transport goods and overcome logistics challenges. One of the most overwhelmingly cited needs by farmers was financial support or cash. And across markets, we found that the adoption and usage of mobile money services increased significantly during the pandemic. And governments also responded with a range of measures, including easing mobile money regulations, such as transaction costs and transaction limits, and also by digitizing government subsidy schemes to the agriculture sector. Finally, lockdowns and limits on non-essential travel triggered a spike in demand for e-commerce services, so virtual marketplaces that would take the place of markets that were closed down. And much of this growth was in the consumer sector, so farmers finding ways to directly sell their produce to the consumer sector. But also e-commerce platforms also provided access to inputs, and also to address transportation challenges and enable some of the logistics that fell away during the pandemic. So finally, I'd like to look at how digital services can play a role in addressing the challenges of climate change, moving from mitigation, so longer-term longer-term strategies to mitigate climate change, through to recovery from the result of climate and extreme weather events. So digital services using pay-as-you-go models can enable smallholder access to climate-friendly technologies such as solar-powered irrigation, which reduce the reliance on diesel generators and thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Also, environmental monitoring and traceability services can provide insights into land use changes and therefore help to reduce deforestation caused by agricultural activities. In terms of adaptation, digital and weather and climate services can support farmers in taking crucial decisions regarding their agricultural practices based on accurate weather and climate predictions, enabling adaptation to changing conditions. And similarly, data-driven agriculture advisory services further increase smallholder productivity in the face of volatile weather patterns by providing dynamic advice based on current and forecast local conditions. Early warning systems can enable farmers to take action and respond to impending events such as heavy rainfall, flooding, or pest and disease infestations. And finally, financial services, and especially insurance services or parametric insurance services, can start to provide a formal safety net for farmers to recover from weather events, while digitally enabled credit and saving services allow farmers to access or build financial buffers. So I hope that provides a level of context and some initial understanding of how digital tools can increase the resilience of agricultural systems in the face of climate shocks and challenges such as the COVID pandemic. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Panos for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Jan. At this point, I would like to welcome our four panelists. If we move to the next slide, you can see that today I'm joined by Faith Duke from Econet Zimbabwe, Elise Lee from Pula Advisors, Andrew Denny from SunCulture, and Catherine Lecombe from SNV Netherlands Development Organization. Now, the topic of the panel discussion is to understand what impact panelists' services have had in building the resilience of smallholder farmers and what steps they have taken to do that using digital technologies. I would first like to start with Faith, who works for Zimbabwe's mobile operator Econet, and more specifically, its digital platform in agriculture, Ecofarmer, that has been deploying farm-to-fork solutions for smallholder farmers, commercial farmers, but also B2B clients. Faith, welcome to our panel discussion. Good to have you today.
Thank you, Panos. Thank you for having me.
Can I start by asking you to briefly share an overview of services offered by Ecofarmer and linking them back to farmer resilience?
Okay, thank you. As you've highlighted, we offer a farm-to-fork digital platform services. We start off with financing of the production itself, as most of the attendants on the panel today have highlighted. Finance has been quite a challenge for most farmers, especially during the pandemic, and also through digital platforms. So we offer finance solutions on our digital platform. We are advantageously placed to offer this solution as we are part of an MNO business with a banking institution and a mobile financial solution. We also offer advisory services in the form of knowledge in agronomy, livestock production, as well as weather services as well. And this is also coupled with our weather indexed insurance as well. A part of our platform services is a shared economies model for tillage, for logistics delivery of inputs to the farms, and as well as the commodity out of the farm to the market. And we use our digital platform to address the biggest challenge that most farmers in Zimbabwe and as well as in Africa face, which is access to markets, particularly so during the pandemic. So this is what we have been offering, and due to the pandemic, we've also grown our service offering to also offer Agri input purchase, the digital platforms, which is an Agri e-commerce platform as well. And this was merely driven by the demand caused by lack of access during the pandemic. What we have seen during the pandemic is that there's been a very big increase in the demand for financial solutions on the digital platform, as well as weather data and Agri advisory information as well.
Fantastic. And you mentioned that a new e-commerce service actually arose during the pandemic. What actually made you or pushed you to look for new services, ideas for the development of new services, and why e-commerce?
This was a demand that came from our B2B partners as well as our farmers as well, due to the decreased movements and the lockdowns that we faced during the pandemic. Access rates really went down, especially in the outskirts of the country and to the disadvantaged farmers. So due to this, we were then forced to come up with a platform that would improve access for the farmers and also improve the reach of our B2B partners to the farmers that are in the areas across the country.
Fantastic, thank you, Faith. Let me now move to our second panelist, Elise. Elise Lee from Pula Advisors. So Pula Advisors is an insurance provider. Elise is spearheading Pula's market entry into new markets in Asia. And previously, Elise worked in and with leading NGOs and foundations across Asia that seek to improve the lives of marginalized persons. Elise, thank you for joining today's session.
Thank you, Panos, for having me, and also for inviting Pula Advisors to join this important discussion. So just a small clarification is that Pula is not an insurance company, but we are an insurer tech company. So we are designing and executing insurance programs for smallholder farmers in emerging markets. And so from our roots in Kenya, we started in about 2015. To date, we have now helped to provide insurance to over 5 million smallholder farmers across the African continent. And since this year, we have started projects now in a number of Asian countries as well as in Latin America. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And can I ask you to actually share maybe some more information on the different services offered by Pula Advisors in Africa, but also in Asia?
Yes. So as I mentioned, we are working with different kinds of stakeholders to design bespoke climate insurance programs for smallholder farmers. And so these clients of Pula can be governments, usually the Ministry of Agriculture. In some countries, we're also working with directly with the central bank, as in the situation in Nigeria. And in the newer countries, typically we are working with support from development agency partners, credit facilities, as well as private sector partners who are looking to de-risk their agricultural production, their investments in their smallholder farms, essentially. And we are providing insurance programs on a growing list of crop insurance programs as well as livestock. And so we are always designing for a group of farmers, and it doesn't matter to us sort of, how small or whether they have land ownership or not, and really, the ones who are carrying, their sort of unfair share of the climate vulnerabilities. Those are exactly the kinds of farmers that we look to serve by protecting them with a meso-micro level insurance.
Fantastic. And very, very briefly, if I can ask you, if you can tell us a bit more maybe about the kind of impact, if we could quantify that even better, of the agri-insurance that Pula Advisors offers, what the kind of impact that insurance services have had on the resilience of smallholder farmers.
Absolutely. So our flagship product is something called the Area Yield Index product, where basically we are ensuring the total yield of the farmer, irregardless of the kinds of perils or risks that can happen, during the entire production period. So from beginning, at planting all the way up to harvest is how the insurance products are designed. And then we are not just doing singular risks like, only excess rain or only floods or only drought, but really any kind of systemic weather event, as well as biological events such as pest or plant-specific diseases, anything that can affect the yield of that the farmer experiences, which is not in his or her control, it can be covered in a systemic index-based way. And so essentially, because the farmers will never have a bad harvest, with the protection of insurance, we're essentially leveling their income projections. And this helps them to stay above debt in, the cyclical events, where previously if there is a weather event, then they have a bad harvest, then they have to either sell off livestock or pull their children out of school, decreases savings, so forth. We can prevent that and basically provide a safety net for the most vulnerable among us, so that we can basically keep them above the red line, so to speak. And we have seen, through our partnership with the World Food Program, which is one of our longest partners, in a longitudinal study, that we can actually show, for the farmers that have been insured over the 5-year time, that they have indeed experienced increases in income, increases in savings, as well as increases in their own investments.
There's no such thing as guaranteed harvest for a farmer. So that builds the case for insurance services and protection at various levels in the production process. We're going to have the chance to maybe address another question a bit later. Now I would like to move to our third panelist, Andrew. Andrew works for SunCulture, which is a technology company that offers irrigation systems to farmers. Through his work, Andrew focuses on bringing new innovations to the rural African market with a strong focus on digital agriculture and fintech solutions for smallholder farmers. Thank you for joining us today, Andrew.
Thank you, Panos. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Can you briefly share with us an overview of services offered by SunCulture, your organization?
Yeah, so SunCulture commercializes life-changing technologies for smallholder farmers. The flagship product, as Panos has said, is the solar-powered irrigation kit. So what we do is we design, manufacture, sell, provide financing, which is kind of the key component, as well as do after sales for all of our systems. And then on top of that, we try to layer on additional services that can help farmers adapt to the changing climate. So in terms of the climate lens to SunCulture, we're both on the mitigation side. So we're displacing the baseline of a diesel or a petrol pump, which emits dirty fuel into the atmosphere. And then also on the adaptation side, where we kind of allow farmers to access groundwater that they wouldn't have normally been able to access just using the power of the sun. And on top of that, we're also layering on different ag advisory services, such as a weather-based SMS, recommendation to a farmer on when to irrigate their crops. And we're looking into a bunch of other different services.
Thank you for making the connection to the slide that Jan presented earlier about mitigation, adaptation, and the various other steps in building climate resilience of farmers. Can I ask you, during the ongoing pandemic, how has usage of SunCulture services been affected?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of companies, we saw some negative effects. Just sales declining because purchasing power amongst farmers rapidly declined in Kenya. Repayments went down significantly. Supply chain issues came in. Obviously, for us, like a chip shortage drastically impacts kind of the inventory that we have of our systems, and that will continue throughout 2022. It also limited the touch points that we could have with customers just for safety reasons. So as a business, we kind of had to adapt. We had to go fully remote. We started gathering feedback from our customer base, and kind of one of the number one things, as you can imagine, as a pay as you go business, or for us a pay as you grow business, is that farmers were asking for loan forgiveness. And so we kind of went back to our investors and other impact players in the space to see if we could kind of push out the loan repayments for our customers so that they could afford this life-changing technology. We also changed a bit our marketing strategy. For example, we had a big push for digital marketing, referral programs as well, anything we could do online. compared to in the past where we were doing a lot of demonstrations and market storms. And then we added in a weather-based SMS, like I mentioned. And what we found, so 60 Decibels did a report, and they found that 88% of Kenyan farmers indicated that they were worse off financially because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But our farmers, actually 81% of our customers reported improving their incomes, and 95% reported improving their quality of life. So we saw actually, since we're a bit coming out of this pandemic in Kenya, we've seen a big increase in demand of our services. And we've seen as well on kind of the partnerships side, governments are interested in stepping up and saying, okay, for example, the Togolese government launched a subsidy program with us in December because they realized the importance of growing crops in their own country and not relying on imports and increasing productivity of their farmers, such that they don't have to import a ton of food, which is very reliant on the supply chains that are in shambles because of COVID-19. So yeah, a lot of adjustments that we made, but kind of a refocus towards the core business of trying to serve our farmers in the best way that we can.
Thank you, Andrew. And the stats you shared about improving profitability, but also livelihoods, that's really powerful. So good to hear that you came across such impressive results. Now let's move to Catherine. Last but not least, Catherine is joining us as a global technical advisor from the SNV. Catherine focuses on livestock and pastoralism and is currently providing technical assistance for the implementation of an AgriTech service called GABA in the Sahel region of Africa. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Panos, for having me.
So SNV, Catherine, has been involved in the GABA service for pastoralists. Can you briefly introduce the service for us?
Sure. So the GABA service is based on, actually it's a public-private partnership, first of all, meaning that it's an alliance of several stakeholders that have invested into an innovative solution targeting mobile herders and nomadic herders in Sahel region. So that PPP is really focusing on improving the resilience of climate-affected pastoralists through a greater use and access to geosatellite information. Why geosatellite? You might be aware nowadays that with satellite we can know very precisely where pasture and water are located, and those two resources are very critical, especially in drylands, for nomadic herders to make decisions where to move. So we are using those information and combining them with data collected on the ground by pastoralists themselves, farmers, and we're displaying them at a call center that is commercially exploited by a mobile network operator, where call operators are answering in local languages to the question raised by end users. And so it means that the service is accessible over a simple mobile phone or via USSD request. So the GABA service has been commercially launched in 2017 in Mali and is also available now in Burkina Faso since 2019, and we are starting our operation also in Niger this year. Since the service is commercially exploited, we have more than 500,000 unique users, and we are progressively also moving into a more bundled services with moving from B2C services, with agriculture advisory to B2B solution. With an e-marketplace being launched this week in Burkina Faso to improve access to markets for smallholder farmers and pastoralists in that country.
Great. Can you tell us maybe share more information about the use of the service during the COVID-19 pandemic. So GSMA has published a blog on Garbal service earlier this year, and I think the first indications from last year, shortly after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, have been actually very positive in relation to use of the service and supporting farmers. Can you give us a more a broader picture of how Garbal service has been supporting farmers during the pandemic?
Yeah, so indeed, what we have noticed is an increase in the use of Garbal service during the pandemic, with more than 115% increase in use for calls, less for USSD requests. So it was really interesting to notice that the request for more advisory, more information was expressed by the end user during that period, where in Mali and Burkina there was no lockdown, but a lot of restriction on movement at some moment. So it was really critical for people to have the information on the supply chain, the market, and that's where Garbal provided added value for the end users. So that growth continue, but as also mentioned by Andrew, we had to adapt our enrollment campaign to adopt more protective measures. So we also had to take new measures to ensure that the uptake of the service will continue. The growth in requests and calls has been also a challenge to manage because it requested more investment at the call center for people to have their call answered by the call operators. So we had to adapt ourselves to the changing situation.
Thank you, Catherine. Maybe a quick round of questions now, going back to Faith. Faith, I would like to ask you to share your organization's focus areas with respect to climate resilience. So what are you planning, what is Ecofarmer planning to do or is already doing with respect to climate resilience of farmers?
Okay, thank you, Panos. So our key focus areas as we get into the future will be financing, as well as the weather advisory services. We've also got a key strategic focus on climate smart farming equipment. For example, conservation tillage is a very big part of a focus area for our country and for our government, and it's going to be our stride as we go forward.
Thank you, thanks. And a question to you, Andrew. We talked about SunCulture services and the impact or the pickup of these services during the pandemic and the impact on farmers. How else is SunCulture working towards the climate resilience of farmers? Is there anything else you would like to share with us, with the group?
Yeah, so yeah, the main kind of thing is that, we're providing sustainable water source in a time when there's unpredictable rain-fed agriculture, which is what most smallholder farmers are relying on. I think 96% of smallholder farmers in Africa depend on rain-fed ag, and to mitigate the kind of impact of drought through groundwater, because there's not a scarcity of water in Africa. There's an economic scarcity, so it's just the ability to pull that water up from the ground. Additionally, we're looking into a few other services that we can offer. We're actually talking with NASA, who has some interesting evapotranspiration data, which would help us give even more granular recommendations to farmers on when to irrigate their crops. Some other things that we're doing are financing the equipment and kind of using the data from that equipment to enable additional credit lines to be advanced to smallholder farmers, such that they can kind of prepare in advance for climate shocks. And then we're also working with, we're looking into the carbon markets to see if we can secure carbon credits, given that our systems are replacing the baseline of diesel and petrol fuels, such that we can generate some carbon revenue, which can lower the price that we offer our products and services to farmers, such that we can scale up to reach more of them, as well as layer on some of these additional climate resilient digital services, such as a SunCulture app in the future that we could leverage.
Awesome, thank you. That's very interesting, especially the carbon credits. It seems like many organizations are starting to think about that, and so the fact that the COP26 event took place only recently is actually reinforcing the case for that. Catherine, a quick question for you. How can the lessons learned during the COVID-19 pandemic be applied to the growing climate crisis we're facing? Obviously, starting from the GABA service, but feel free to expand as well.
Thank you for the question, Pula. I think more innovation is needed to build the resilience of our targeted audience and to cope with climate disaster and shocks. And to make that happen, more investment is also needed and required. I mean, you mentioned it, I'm focusing on livestock sector, and it should be noticed that the investment and the innovation in that sector are, let's say, less vibrant compared to agriculture. So I think there is also a lot to do. I think also in terms of knowledge sharing with private sector is needed. What we have learned from our experience as a facilitator of public-private partnership, working with mobile network as operator and smallholder farmer association, it's that, you know, that dialogue is really needed to ensure that we are answering to the users' needs, and so local perspectives are needed to feed that stakeholder dialogue, but also to ensure that private sector has access to the knowledge generated by those innovation, so that they can join and create alliances and invest. And maybe lastly, I think time is for implementation now. You stressed out how climate crisis is growing, and the pandemic was a good wake-up call for all of us that innovation is needed to try to be more efficient, to get more impact and greater impact at scale.
Innovation is indeed needed, yes, and commercially sustainable models that investors and donors can support are also needed. So many thanks for your contribution here. Last but not least, I would like to actually go back to Elise. And Elise, you mentioned at the very start of our panel discussion that Pula has recently moved to Asia as well. And I wanted to ask you, how have Pula services developed during the pandemic, and what have been the drivers behind this expansion, and any challenges that you might have faced during this expansion?
Thank you so much, Panos, for that question. And so, I mean, in terms of our expansions, especially into new markets, where, you know, previously we had never insured farmers, and also, you know, we had never had local engagements. Yeah, there were many challenges. And so yeah, I don't think you know, we have enough time to kind of go into all of the details. But I think one way that Pula was well equipped to enter into new markets, even without a local physical presence, is because you know, the way that Pula's operational capacities and systems are set up is for us to be able to work with really anyone, anywhere, already. And so, all of our systems are digitalized. All of our field staff from, the beginning of the engagement is digitalized. And so, yeah, we can, do monitoring and evaluations both internally as well as share, on all of our work with different stakeholders, also digitally. So I think, those systems were already in place, and, we are continuously improving on those systems as well. And although I didn't choose innovator as one of our categories, I think there are many things that we have innovated to also integrate, different kinds of services and processes also internally to be able to better serve, especially in new markets. Thank you.
Fantastic. A warm thank you to all our panelists now. And now is the time to actually move to the breakout room session. We're going to split into 3 breakout rooms and discuss the role of different stakeholders in enhancing the resilience of food systems and supporting smallholder farmers. Breakout room discussions will last approximately 20 minutes. Our panelists can be seen on these slides. The first, Faith, Elise, and Andrew, and then Catherine. The 4 panelists are going to support and moderate the 3 breakout rooms. The first breakout room is going to discuss the role that mobile operators can play in enhancing the resilience of food systems and smallholder farmers. The second one is going to discuss the role of innovators. And the third one is going to discuss the role of donors and investors. I would like to ask the panelists who agreed to play the role of moderators, as soon as you join the breakout room, to identify a person from the audience or yourselves that you feel comfortable taking a few notes from the discussion that is going to happen in the breakout rooms, and then share the notes back with the broader audience once we reconvene in about 20 minutes time. So we are ready now. If I can ask the organizers to actually go ahead with the splits. Thank you.
Yep, all the rooms are open, so just feel free to click on the one that you're assigned to. Everyone's split up evenly.
Thank you.
Great. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a very interesting and productive discussion. I know we certainly did. Some very useful kind of thoughts and inputs from the group, both on what is currently very positive that is happening, and also some thoughts about how the situation could be improved. At this point, it would be great if the people that were taking notes in each one of the breakout rooms could just come back and share the main findings and the key points that were made in your discussions. Let's just work across the different groups. So could we start with the mobile operators group? Who was taking notes there and would like to share some of the main findings?
All right, thank you. So I will be taking you through the findings of our first group. And the key takeout was the importance of all the players in the agri sector, in the value chain, mainly the private business players, the MNO itself, the government, and the not-for-profit, just to mention a few, to work together in coming up with initiatives to improve resilience around food systems, especially using digital platforms. The key point that came out there was that, for example, there are so many initiatives that are working right now in Europe and in other continents that African countries do not have access to, because they do not have access to 4G and 5G data in most areas. So there's a need for a partnership between and an involvement between between platform developers and the MNO business itself, as well as the other private businesses as well. We also realized the power that data has in improving access to finance, especially if meshed with mobile finance, to give information to banks that they don't currently have, as most farmers in Africa don't have access to banks, but they do most of their banking using mobile digital banking. Even purchase of things like airtime can give invaluable data to banking institutions to provide finance to farmers. We also looked at issues around mobile platform that are currently sitting with private businesses, for example, tractor equipment owners, but are not being housed with MNO businesses. So the farmers do not have access at the end of the day. I'll also give opportunity to the other participants of our breakout session to also add more information that I might have missed out.
Great, thanks a lot, Faith. And yeah, please feel free, any of the other participants, if you'd like to add to the points that Faith made.
I think Faith has actually covered it all, quite a few points there. Very, very interesting discussion about the power of data, about how this data, when it is involving mobile operator data as well, can actually support financial inclusion of farmers. So maybe in the interest of time, we can move to the second breakout from Jan. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Panos. Yeah, so if the people that were in the innovators group could unmute yourself and share the findings from your discussion. Hi, I think this was Andrew and Elise. Did either of you assign a rapporteur or?
No, I don't think we have, but I said at some point that I will take note, and I think we assume that that will be me. So hi, I'm Lisa from the GSMA. I was listening to the conversation in the room 2, and the room 2, yeah, that was with innovators and how innovators can increase reliance of farmers. So we started by actually discussing the different challenges that the farmers faced in the different markets, especially in Nigeria. And we talked about access to markets and how that's a challenge, and we wanted to discuss a bit more on market linkages, and yeah, also digital literacy. I mean, we discussed a bit of this challenge, and the next point that the group made was the importance of taking the customer feedback into account and basically to start from there, because as innovators, you design solutions, you design products, and for example, Andrew mentioned, the design of an IoT sensor that was very technological, very nice, but that was not meeting exactly the challenge of the farmers. So and especially on the cost side, the cost was something that was mentioned by the group as a challenge to design solutions, but the willingness to pay really is tough on the other side. And as we ended the discussion, we were discussing about how to incentivize the long-term adoption of these technologies by farmers is really a nut to crack.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Yeah, some really interesting points that you make there. And it sounds like a lot of this is really about the user perspective. So you started by talking about the challenges that farmers face, and then also how AgriTechs and innovators can actually address those needs and need to address those needs in order to provide solutions that are actually viable for farmers, both from a usability aspect and also for costs. So thanks a lot for those insights. And yeah, from the last group, the donors and investors, Catherine, would you like to go ahead and share your findings?
Sure. So in our group, we had very interesting conversation. First of all, there was some skepticism expressed on, you know, we're living in a very uncertain period with a lot of unknowns. So, and especially the risk appetite to innovate from different donors and investors differs. So it might be interesting to have models to assess business viability and ensure that this risk appetite is reduced for the different donor and investors. Then there was also a discussion around, the need for more coordination between donors to avoid duplication and to ensure impact, because the different people within the group were expressing having testimonies in some countries where several donors were funding potential competing initiative in the same area, which doesn't make sense. So more coordination, more alignment, and that brings us to the conversation on how the donor community can also support the creation of a more conducive environment at national level, especially if countries could have clear digital strategy plans. It will be, of course, easier for donors to align with those visions and contribute to funding those visions. So, it was like the suggestion really to support countries to have this kind of national plans and vision. Also important to support the emergence of a vibrant digital ecosystem. And we discussed lastly, some initiative in countries where seed funds into youth-led startups, or the organization of hackathon, this kind of event can be really supportive for innovation to happen with ground scheme. And we, on another level, we also said that, connectivity is increasing, but at the same time, there are still some places, remote places, and especially rural areas that are not yet having access to connectivity. So to realize the potential of technology, this will be also very important to pay attention to the increase of connectivity in those areas and foster public-private dialogue around the creation of more infrastructure for connectivity to reach those areas. I'm trying to wrap up, but I will invite my colleague to add on and complement what I just said.
So thanks, Catherine. I think you've covered all the points that we made. So that's really interesting, and a lot of areas were touched upon. So it's really looking at kind of at a big picture level, that there's this role of donors to kind of understand in this massively ambiguous landscape, kind of where are the areas that have the most potential, where do funds need to go, and at the same time you kind of need to work together with governments to make sure that the strategies are complemented and there's not a lot of activities happening in silos, and then also the role to keep an eye and make sure that even the most marginal communities are still addressed, and that we're aware of this gap that still exists in terms of digital access, digital accessibility, and that we continue to work towards bridging that divide. So thanks a lot for the contribution there. I think that actually brings us to time, and I'd like to thank all of you for joining the session. I'd like to thank the panelists for your time and your contributions. Thanks for the very interesting discussions. And just to say, if you're interested in learning more about these topics, Please do go ahead and visit the GSMA AgriTech website. We've got a number of resources there that are relevant to these topics. So we published a report earlier this year on how COVID-19 accelerated the use of digital agriculture tools. We also published a report on digital innovation for climate resilient agriculture earlier this year, and more recently one that looks at business models that can support the financial inclusion of smallholder farmers. And we continue to be active in this space. As Panos said, we also do a lot of work around kind of understanding best practices and making connections between practitioners in this space. So if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to get in touch and discuss directly with you. So just to wrap up, thanks again for your time. It was great to have you on the session, and I wish you a great rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Have a
Take
good
care.
rest
Bye,
of the day.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for a great conference or
Bye.
session. Bye.
Bye.